Hey everybody, it's Toby. Nice to have you back. Um, so I recently did a little test with Blender and in particular with Blender Grease Pencil in order to learn the software and see how everything works around there and what you can do with it. And I made this little scene here you might be familiar with. And it was quite positively received. And I saw a lot of people were asking on a little bit more of an in-depth look on how I assembled this thing. So I thought I'm gonna walk through the Blender file very quickly with everybody so you guys can see what exactly I did here. I apologize for maybe being a little bit jumbled here and there, so I didn't write anything down beforehand. So, but let's see how we're getting on. So this is the set with the biker driving through, and I'm currently in my camera. This is one of the first things I animated in this sequence, was like a very basic blocking with basically just like a box and a sphere, or like this little monkey head that Blender provides in order to fix the position of my main character and the monster, and then animated this camera swing around in order to follow them down the road. So, and then I drew over it. I may have shown you when I leave the scene camera and go into like the regular perspective mode, how this scene is assembled. So basically we have this main set here consisting of, well, that's how I split it up. It's basically matte painting scene A, it's here on the left side, and matte painting scene B, it's here on the right side. And I have the main camera here. Let's see how I can. I still don't know perfectly how this works with like the visibilities in Blender. I'm used to Maya, so there you go. But what we have, the camera is here where this little dotted line ends, and all the characters are drawn on a plane or on several planes. I started with one, but I had to splice it up in several planes. I'm gonna get to that later. Where I basically drew the characters and all the effects directly on the camera lens, if you will. And if I skip the timeline, you see that those things are like moving together with the camera. Just like it's like having a sheet of glass that is in front of your camera and linked to your camera all the time. And this way, I didn't have to worry about like the placement of the grease pencil object in the scene. So there's like another approach that I could have done, like placing the grease pencil object where the character was actually in the scene. And I think if I had to do this again, I would probably choose this approach because as you see, if I go back to the camera scene mode, I had some issues fixing the walk behinds. You see, like, for example, the smoke here, it's on top of all those buildings and and sometimes here the ground is clipping away some of the effects. And when the motorcyclist comes out of this little alleyway here, he's actually not interacting with the building the correct way. And those are things I fixed in post in After Effects by basically rendering out a mask, a black and white mask of just this building contour and using this as a luma key for the cyclist. And I think I would have saved myself quite a little time and troubles if I had just taken the time and set it up correctly, but I never knew how far I would take this, so I just glued it to the camera and there you go. So this is the scene with everything assembled in it. I started out blocking this whole scenery with a couple of 3D geometries, like boxes and stuff for the buildings. But then quite quickly, I decided to go ahead and replace this with matte painting planes. And the way I did this was putting a plane roughly where the building would be. For example, this whole part of the street is one building and or one image texture. And I used a camera projection for this. So how this works is I have several cameras here. For example, the matte projector one. Oh, this doesn't work right now. Oh, well, yeah, see, I'm still learning the software. But how this works, you can get an object and you can place a camera in the scene. This one should be right about here. And this camera works as like a sort of, it's sort of like a screen projector. Like the camera is like throwing the image on top on this plane, and it's using the camera as like a UV coordinate system. When I did this, I basically chose two cameras, one from roughly this side, like all based on my screen. One from this side should have been around like this camera or so, and like widened it a bit and rendered the scene. And then I chose one that was the other side, which was round about here, and rendered this. And then I just made a painting in Photoshop of the cityscape, which was give me a second. So yeah, or something like this, right? So very rough sketches on how I wanted the architecture to be. Then I cut this apart in like little slices, and I try to use first like the camera that I used to paint it from as a projection camera, and basically throw the painted artwork back on the scene geometry in order to receive like these parallax effects that are happening. That you actually have the feeling that the camera is flowing through the scene with you. And didn't work out perfectly as I wanted to, but I already expected this, did this before at some point. Like the camera projection is never like that reliable. So basically every house, every like separate building here, you can like flip through it, why not? So you see, this is, for example, a patch for the street. This is the street with light. Gonna get to that later. And this is, for example, one of the houses. I didn't put very much detail into this side here because we almost never see it in the film. And this is another building, and each of those buildings basically received a separate projection camera. And I like adjusted it and shoved it around a bit. It's good that I didn't have to work like crazy precise or anything. Like it's a for fun project in the end, so it's fine. And you notice that a lot of those images, they have several different versions. For example, this one here, there's a street that receives this patch of light where the sun hits it. And this one is the same image, but without the sun patch. The same here, there's the church in shadow, and here is it with light on it. And I'm gonna get to this later. Same here, again, you see the barn is getting by sunlight, and there's the barn completely dark. The thing why I did this is I wanted to have shadows cast from the characters onto the scene. And the only real way I could do this was by, you notice this little dark blob behind here, behind the characters. This is the shadow layer. This is the shadow that the beast casts on the scenery, and like the smoke cloud that it emits. And you have another one, this comes out from here, that the motorcycle guy casts. And you also see, like if you watch closely, this shadow doesn't really correspond to the contours of the environment. It's really hard to do, didn't want to bother with it really. Same here, it's like going all over the place. You know, the shadow of the tentacles going outside of the silhouette, and also it's like just like a big dark blob that's lying on top of the scene. So what I did is I basically produced two versions of the set. I split it up for rendering purposes in several like visibility layers, and something I can highly recommend, and it's actually mandatory, I think, if we want to do it properly. So probably gonna take a while to load. Oh no, actually quite fast. So this is just the pure set without any of the characters. All it's nice and bright and sunlit. But then there's also this version set shadow, which is basically the same set. Oh, now it takes a while to load the whole geometry. And what I did, this background pass of just the environment, yeah, there we go. I rendered this pass 2 times, one time with sunlight, and this time it's all shadowy. Like this building is in shadow, this one is in shadow, and this barn, this church. They all have shadows, and basically used then in compositing the cast shadow layer that I just showed you. This one that goes over the edges to basically mask out the background paths that I wanted to use. So I told the program, okay, wherever this shadow mask is, I want this shadowy background to appear. But the parts that are in light and that are not affected by the characters, like this background here, for example, it's the same background as the other one. In that way, I could like be really free with how I place my cast shadows, and it would only affect the objects that I wanted to affect in the scenery. Another thing, let me just go back to all. This is like my layer for the whole scene assembly. What I did is, I mentioned earlier, I started out with drawing all the characters on one grease pencil object. If you go here, you have your separate layer with grease pencil. Didn't focus how you wanted it to. So for example, this is the layer with the motorcycle guy. And you have different layers here, right? I made sure that I name them all correctly because, as you know from Photoshop, like can get quite confusing if you don't do that. So can switch them all out one by one. There's like, this is a layer with the line art, and then you have the separate materials like the tires of the wheels, his shoes, the material of the motorcycle, and so on. And having this all in one separate grease pencil object meant I could do other things with other layers. So again, if you look from the side here, you see that it's actually all different sheets of glass behind each other. Reason for that being, I wanted to be able to take those layers with the special effects. For example, the smoke here, this is the smoke layer, Elder FX. Can shove it out a little. Can I shove it out? Hello. Oh yeah, there we go. So this is a separate layer, and I wanted to be able to apply modifiers to it. In that case, it is a Gaussian blur in order to give it the feeling that is kind of a soft effect and not this kind of harsh thing that is, or like this super sharp present thing that is the characters, in order to like make them pop a little bit off screen. Yeah, and that's the way I achieved it, and can highly recommend. Again, like you see how with the motorcycle guy there's like a million layers already in this one here, but gets much more manageable if you can actually select the object, for example the smoke thing here, and you just have this one layer, and there you go. If you want to know anything else about my process, like let me know or comment or like write me on Facebook or whatever, and I can see if I can do some more of the explanatory stuff. This wasn't probably like super comprehensible and super detailed and super technical, but yeah, man, I just wanted to give you an impression of how this thing came to be. And yeah, you can follow me on YouTube. I'm gonna try to put out some more stuff in the future. Maybe I had this idea, since like it was kind of well received, this little sequence, to like expand it a bit, make a little bit of a sequence out of it, like a mini short or so, nothing too fancy. Oh no, the smoke is just like on the side there, isn't it? Well, now it's like Monster's vaping now. Vape Monster. There you go. Okay. So yeah, let me know. Happy for the feedback, and I hope you enjoyed this little presentation. And see you guys next time. Goodbye.